Hello and welcome to the Indian Express Explained Live. My name is Vujit Roy and I am the diplomatic editor at the Indian Express. Today we are joined by Mr. Navtej Sarna, a retired diplomat and an acclaimed author. He is our guest expert for this session on the situation in West Asia, crisis and way forward in a crucial region. Ambassador Sarna, welcome to the Indian Express Explained Live.
Thank you, Shubhaji. Thank you.
Ambassador Sarna has served in Israel as India's ambassador, as a counselor at the Indian Embassy in Tehran, and as India's ambassador to the United States, as well as the Indian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. In his long and illustrious career, he has really worked on this region and has watched this region very closely. It is fair to say that outside the Indian official establishment, he is among the foremost experts and the most knowledgeable voices and minds that we have on this region. Ambassador Sarna, this particular, as we start the session, we have seen these, attacks in Rafah, and if I could just lay the context for this session, this Hamas attack on Israel really triggered merciless retaliation, and Gaza is on the brink of famine, and Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu could face an arrest warrant for war crimes. In the recent weeks and months, the tensions between Israel and Iran have risen dramatically, as we saw missile strikes which were intercepted by the both countries, their militaries, last month. In the last few months, the Israel-US relations have also seen unusual dissonance. To add to this turmoil in West Asia, the tragic death of Iran's President Raisi has brought an unexpected element of uncertainty. Now, this regional situation, how it evolves and impacts the world and India, is something that everyone is closely watching. Ambassador Sarna, if I could have your preliminary thoughts on how do you see the end game for the war in Gaza?
Thank you, Shubhaji. Thank you for inviting me and for your comments. You've already laid out the broad landscape of what has been happening. And you're absolutely right. I think the region is actually, even as we speak, even as we begin to think that, okay, maybe we are coming near closure, we are maybe going to look at a lessening of what's been happening, something else happens, and that something has been Rafah in the last couple of days, with all the implications and the reactions that we are seeing worldwide at the moment. Honestly, your question regarding the end game, I'm afraid nobody knows, least of all me. I mean, the fact is that this is a major problem, because the attack of October 7 by the Hamas on Israel was such a strong attack. It was so brutal in its execution. And I'm not going into why it happened and all, we can come down to that. Yeah. That the reaction of Israel is now a maximal reaction. It is that it will not stop until Hamas is destroyed. Hamas will never again be in a position to do what they did on October 7th. Now, that has been the driving force for Israel, because it feels threatened, it feels vulnerable. Their highly wanted security, intelligence, everything failed on October 7th. And therefore, Israel is not in a mood to stop short of the destruction of Hamas. Now, that is easier said than done because we've seen 8 months of relentless bombing. We've seen 30,000, 34,000, 35,000. I mean, there's no point quibbling about these figures. Dead, including a large disproportionate amount of civilians in Gaza. And the fact is that nobody knows when this is going to stop. And you can only begin to think of a day after once you know when the day is. So there is no game which is acceptable. Everybody has an idea. In fact, the war cabinet of Israel, amongst themselves, are now fighting. Yoav Gallant and Benny Gantz, who joined, have been associates in the war cabinet with Bibi Netanyahu, have, differed with him on the endgame. Right. Like, when is there going to be a ceasefire? Where are we going to have a hostage deal? And suppose there is a ceasefire and a hostage deal, then what happens to Gaza? Do we occupy it? Do we let Hamas come back? Do we let the Palestinian Authority come back? Will it be handed over to an international body? So I'm afraid there is no daylight in sight.
Right. Thank you for this opening preliminary thoughts. Before I move, I have to thank our partner for this session, Plutus IS. Ambassador Sarna, this particular attack, let me circle back to October 7th and maybe a little before that. You've watched this region very closely. If you could give us a sense of Hamas's origins, how did an attack of this scale it took place, and what was the strategic objective behind those brutal attacks on October 7th?
Well, very briefly, because to give a lecture on Hamas will take up all our time, but I will say that it's basically an Islamist group, a resistance group, which has been there since the 80s as a part of the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. And it has both a political dimension as well as a military dimension. And since 2006, it won the election against its rival, which is Fatah, which controls the West Bank in terms of the Palestinian Authority aspects of the control. It has been virtually within the overall blockade of Israel, the people who are been ruling Gaza for all practical purposes. Now, that doesn't mean that they've been ruling it as an independent state or anything. Israel, though it left Gaza, kept complete control over its access, over water, over electricity, over its entry, over movement, etc. Now, this Hamas has been actually, as now evidence has come out in the last few months, that actually this has been funded. It's a resistance group which is, of course, funded in material terms, financial terms from Iran, but also by other countries, for instance, Qatar. And a lot of the funds from Qatar have been actually funneled through Israel to Hamas. Of course, now it is said that a lot of the funds did not go to the people, but went into building up military infrastructure. But the fact is that Netanyahu kept Hamas alive, kept Hamas going, because that divided Hamas and Fatah, that divided Gaza and the West Bank, and that gave him the clear option of telling the world that how do I talk peace with the Palestinians? There is nobody to talk to. Now, I'm afraid all this led to a point of time where Hamas decided to launch this huge attack. And the moment that they chose, I mean, there have been various theories as why that moment was there. But I think even if I just mention 2 or 3 aspects, one was that the United States has taken its eye off the ball for several years now. of the ball of Israel-Palestinian peace process, the Middle East peace process. I think the last person who made any movement towards that was President Obama. After that, what President Trump has done and President Biden has carried on those policies has been to work on the outside-in approach. That let's normalize Israel, Saudi Arabia, let's normalize Israel, UAE, Bahrain, etc., and stress on economic development, and thereby the Palestinian problem will either go away or get minimized. And this was an illusion. It was an illusion which Israel got convinced of, or parts of Israel, or the leadership, and they thought that the Palestinian problem is now too small to bother about. An earlier Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, said, this problem is shrapnel in the butt. We can handle it. It's okay. But thereafter, now what has happened is that was one aspect. And people believe that the Israel-Saudi Arabia deal of normalization was at the last point of becoming a reality. And if it had become a reality without a clear path to a Palestinian state, then I think the Palestinian state would have become even more of a chimera than it is today. So one belief is that Hamas decided to become the flag bearer of Palestinian resistance, given the fact that the Fatah or the Palestinian Authority has become so weak, reportedly so corrupt, and people have no trust in it, and they are basically seen as contractors of the Israeli state, that they decided to take this move. B, there was a lot of provocation from the Israeli extreme right-wing government, the partners of Netanyahu, through the year. There was increased provocations in the West Bank. There was increased provocations on the Temple Mount or the Haram al-Sharif. There were several incidents which provoked, the Palestinians. At the same time, there was tremendous internal discontent in Israel. For months, there were protests over Netanyahu's judicial reforms. Israeli society, Israeli polity, even Israeli defense was divided. There were officers from the elite groups who were protesting against Netanyahu. So everything was there. There were too much happening. There was too much distraction. I think Hamas chose that moment. It was a terrible attack. It was a barbaric attack, and that set off this chain of events that we have spoken about.
Right. The Israel response, there are, before I come to Israel's response, do you think this attacks by the Hamas, did it have any imprimatur of the Iranian regime? What is your sense?
We didn't see any evidence of that, or I didn't read anything about that. In fact, Israelis and Americans both felt that there was no clear design that Iran was immediately behind it. But as I said, Hamas has been funded materially, financially by Iran. Iran did praise the attack. So I think they may have been in the knowledge of the attack. But even the other groups, for instance, the Hezbollah, Nasrallah, one of his messages which he gave on television seemed to indicate that, look, we had nothing to do with it. We did not know about it. But now that it has happened, we are here. If any red lines are crossed, then we will do certain things. So it seems that probably in terms of secrecy, in terms of efficacy, the Hamas may have kept it to itself.
Right. Now, the Israel's response, in the first few weeks when I was in Israel, one saw that the response came out of emotion. There was a sort of sense where people felt betrayed by their own government, their own intelligence agencies not being able to protect the Israeli civilians. And the government of the day took the call to go ahead with a which is seen as a very disproportionate response to, as earlier you pointed out, the numbers we can quibble about them, but the response has been extremely disproportionate. Now, in the initial months, there was a lot of support, a lot of sympathy for Israel. But over a period of time, as we say, body count went up, we saw that support thinning in Western capitals, in friends of Israel who were supportive. And how did it move? Do you see this evolution of response to Israel's response to these attacks?
I think you summed it up very well, Shubhajit. I think immediately after the attack, because of the very barbaric nature of the attack, there was a huge wave of sympathy. Because you see, we must see that before October 7th, Israel had established renewed relationships with many countries, new partnerships with many countries, even within the Middle East. You had diplomatic relations with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and you had Israeli tourists traveling to Dubai and to Marrakesh and all that. And there was a lot of sense of hope and acceptance, a broadly an acceptance. Now, this was all fine, except everybody thought that this acceptance can make us forget the Palestinian problem. In any case, when the attack happened, there was a lot of sympathy, there was support, etc. And unfortunately, when the only way that Israel thought that they could get Hamas was to pummel Gaza into rubble, that meant that you would have, given the topography, given the population density, given the fact that it is closed, people have nowhere to go, and a huge amount of weaponry that has been spent on Gaza. I mean, there's one estimate which says that the total tonnage of bombs dropped is like 3 nuclear bombs. And if you, in that little space, which essentially is like Las Vegas County in terms of areas, you had an increasing number of civilian casualties. And the Israelis would have you believe that these were necessary to get to the Hamas, who were in the tunnels, who were hiding in various things. Then the jury came out on whether this crosses the Geneva Convention definitions of proportionality in terms of loss of civilian life, in terms of dual-use targeting, in terms of targeting of humanitarian aid. And as each of those things began to happen, the support for Israel began to unravel. And that it's, of course, reached its peak when the ICJ was approached by South Africa. And the ICJ, took a preliminary decision that there were some elements which could be amounting to genocide, something which Israel, of course, reacted very strongly to. And so there has been a division within the United States. There have been more increased number of campus protests, as you have seen. There's a division amongst the within the Democratic Party itself. There is a division in Europe, as you have seen now. 3 countries have recognized the state of Palestine. There is a discontent or lack of sympathy appearing in parts of the global South because they see a kind of divided and a uncoordinated sort of reaction from the West on Ukraine and on Gaza. There's a different approaches are being adopted. So I think, unfortunately, this has been a diplomatic debacle for Israel. As we speak, the Israeli embassy in Mexico has been attacked by protesters. These are not the things that I'm sure Israel would have wanted to see. It spent a huge amount of capital on trying to be recognized and accepted by as many countries in the world as possible. So There is no denying it. There has been, a degradation of Israel's international standing and diplomatic status.
Right. And here I would want to come to Israel's leader Bibi Benjamin Netanyahu, who it is one of it will go. He will go down in history as someone during whose term, during whose government, such a attack of such a scale took place, and after that, this particular position that you say that where is taken international standing, Israel's international standing has taken a hit. Now, what does it mean for Netanyahu? You've seen his sort of evolution over the years. You've served as an ambassador there. So, what is your sense? Where does he go from there about his reputational damage and his future?
Well, all indications would be that if and when this war ends or conflict ends, and there is a change of government, most likely in Israel, that Netanyahu's political career will come to an end at the very least. Of course, he also faces, legal consequences of the cases that he is involved in. At the same time, Netanyahu is supposed to be the person they say that when he's pushed into a corner, he dances. He's supposed to have many, many lives, and he has shown that in the last 15 years of his second tenure, so to speak. But I'm afraid that there will be a lot of anger within Israel. Forget about the rest of the world. Within Israel, there is a lot of anger about where he has led the country. There has been an over-reliance on his extreme religious coalition partners, on his extreme right-wing partners. There has been, he's been tied up with people who have got criminal records, who are known to be racist, who have been making statements which are not acceptable in today's world. So I think his political career is teetering at the edge, and one of the reasons I would believe that he goes on extending this war, doesn't want to go in for a ceasefire deal and a hostage deal, is because this is the one way of personal survival. So, this is as long as the country is at war, he can carry on doing what he can, even though his war cabinet colleagues, the generals, are beginning to get restive. But let me just say that, I don't think Israel will mind if his political career comes to an end ultimately. I don't think the region will mind, because he is not a person who, at the moment, he is in sync with the population on one point, that yes, we want security. We'll finish Hamas, we'll make everything secure, not just Gaza, but he's earlier said that everything from the West Bank of the Jordan River, which means the entire West Bank, will be under Israeli security, which means there will be no sort of Palestinian statehood. At the moment, I think this is an element which resonates with the broad population, which is deeply angry, which is hurt, which is vulnerable. But how long that will last when the dust settles is very doubtful.
Right. Here I would want to, we talked about these barbaric attacks on October 7th, but there are hostages. There were over 130 hostages which are there, and there's a deal that is being worked out. The negotiations that are happening. Why do you think the hostage deal is not working out? What are the challenges as per your information?
Frankly, I think 100 hostages were released in November when there was a pause for about a week. And there's still about 131 hostages in Hamas hands. I think it's a difficult deal to reach because there are too many moving parts. I think the Hamas wants a permanent cessation of hostilities. Uh, that, of course, Israel is not willing to accept. Whether or not they're going to accept a ceasefire is another question. How long would the ceasefire be? What are the hostages who would be exchanged? The reports say even of negotiations, whether there are so many alive hostages, so many dead hostages. What happens to the Hamas prisoners in Israeli prisons? How many are they going to be released? And ultimately, I think a deal like this, as I said, is not in the interests of Netanyahu. So while he's facing a huge domestic constituency of the families and the sympathizers of the hostages, that get a deal, get the hostages out, stop the war,
Right.
he's not listening.
Hmm.
Because that would mean, again, okay, war is over, elections, new government, what happens to BB? Prison?
So then the next question is about these tensions with Iran, between Israel and Iran, that we saw in the month of April. They kind of broke out, and really, for the first time, we saw them attacking each other on their soil, on their territory, and not a proxy attack in some other third country. It started with Israel's attacks on in Syria at the embassy, at the Iranian consulate in Damascus, but then it sort of escalated, and it could well have escalated to a full-fledged conflict. Do you think, could these tensions explode into war? And what do you think? You've served in both the capitals, so you know the people,
Well,
the actors there, the motivations there. What was going on at that point of time?
I think there is a deep antipathy that exists, at least between the ruling elite of the both countries. And let me not go to the people. I mean, that may vary in either country. But I think so far it's not been of interest to either party to escalate this to that level. Yes, there was as long as this conflict goes on, this war goes on, these attacks on Gaza go on, the hostages thing remain unresolved, there is a chance of further escalation. But I think it didn't happen because neither country was interested. The United States had already sent in 2 aircraft carrier strike groups and a nuclear submarine into the region to give a signal that let's not escalate this. The Hezbollah escalated to a point that there has been a depopulation of North Israel as well as southern Lebanon. And there has been exchange of fire, but not to the extent that was feared. There was an outbreak because when the Israelis attacked the consulate, Iranian consulate in Syria, then Iran made a serious attack, which was more of a signal than a real attack because they did not follow it up with more. So I think again, Iranian leadership was in a position when it had to be seen to be doing something, and it did it. And it did not. It is a country also which is quite divided. It is a country which is under sanctions. It is a country with a lot of social discontent. There have been social protests against for instance, the dress code for men and all that. And there have been severe crackdowns between the hardline the Islamic clergy and the guards and the people. So hopefully that moment has passed. And if we now do not go towards more escalation, then hopefully this will not have an outright conflagration into pure regional war. But there was escalation. The Hezbollah escalated. The Houthis finally escalated. The Americans were attacked. There have been 150 attacks on American interests and forces in Syria and Iraq, etc. And they have also responded. The US and UK responded to the Houthis in Yemen. So there has been an escalation. But I think I hope that that's the worst of it, and we don't carry on down that path.
Right. To add to this kind of turmoil, last week we saw the unfortunate death of the Iranian President, Raisi, his foreign minister, and this kind of a chopper crash took place. This kind of tense moment. I wanted you to kind of pivot to talk a bit about Iran. Iran, because the way it is controlled by the supreme leader, and the Iranian president was a hardliner, belonged to that camp after having defeated Hassan Rouhani, who was seen as a moderate, a reformist, and the current situation in Iran, where there is a leadership vacuum at the president's level. Many would argue that the supreme leader is still around, and the IRGC is still around, But at the president's level, at the government level, there's a sort of a vacuum.
Recording stopped.
You think that can be an issue that may complicate matters in this kind of situation, volatile situation, where more hardline
recording in progress
might come into play, with Mojtaba Khamenei becoming a contender now, or IRGC, more hardline clergy might take Raisi's place. How do you see that evolve?
Well, I'm not sure that there is any much potential there to get more hardline. Raisi was very much a hardliner. He was very much a camp follower of the supreme leader, and he came to power with a very hardline reputation of having sent a lot of people to prison and to worse. So I don't think, in terms of both on instability, I don't think it's going to change much, because I think Iran has been very quick off the mark after the unfortunate helicopter accident crash, that they got back to business as usual. Immediately, a caretaker president, a caretaker foreign minister. June 28, I think, is the 50 days when the new president will be brought in. Now, it only remains to be seen who is going to be. Now, given the system in Iran, it cannot vary too much. It has to be cleared by the Guardian Council, etc. Certain people will be filtered out, and there will be an election. And the supreme leader really holds all the cards. I think the focus really has to be on who is going to succeed him. Is it going to be his son, as there is one, as he's one of other contenders? And if he is going to be there, what is his going to approach be? He's younger. Is he going to be a more modern supreme leader, or is he going to be as hardline and clerical in the Islamic sense like his father? Are they going to bring in, just to vary the pack, so to speak, are they going to bring in a slightly more moderate person, so that it can help reopen dialogues with various places? I think in the current situation, given the huge kind of regional tensions that are prevailing, I think Iran, you can expect to carry on on the path that it is, without any serious, moving away from that path. And they will have to be, they are, of course, worried about themselves. They are worried about the sanctions. It's a difficult time, and nothing is getting easier. President Biden has followed President Trump's signals both on Israel and on Iran, and that is meant to continue. So I would think that at the moment the situation there is under control, and I don't think there's going to be too much rocking of the boat there.
Okay. Before I come to, you mentioned US presidential elections, referred to it. I'll come to that. But before that, I want to, pick your brains on how does India view this situation, in the sense that because it has stakes in terms of diaspora, energy, security, and connectivity. And in that context, what are India's stakes, and how does this situation impact India? The war in Gaza is sort of going on, and it seems that the normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia has taken a hit for good. So all these, given the factors, given the information that we have right now, how do you think that impacts India? How does India view this particular situation?
I think anything that happens in Middle East or West Asia is by definition, of extreme importance to us. It is an extended neighborhood in many ways. We are deeply connected, not just by traditional relationships, but we are deeply connected in terms of energy, in terms of access, in terms of trade, in terms of technology. I mean, we have a major relationship with Israel on that, with UAE on that. And of course, you mentioned the diaspora. I think the figure is 8 or 9 million. It keeps changing every time I look at it. It's a huge amount, a source of remittances, a source of our people. And if there is instability in this region, it has implications, very obvious implications for us. If there is instability between Israel and Iran, it has implications for us. Of course, we have managed to keep relationships with all these countries more on a bilateral basis than on an overall regional, approach. But on a bilateral basis, we have done well to have relationships with Israel, with Saudis, with UAE, with Iran, and so on. So I think no kind of instability is in our interest. Conflict is not in our interest. It will impact, for instance, when the Houthis were attacking, ships on the Red Sea, it certainly impacts our trade. And you have to send your ships around the, Cape of Good Hope. So all that, is inevitable that we will be impacted. So I think a return to stability. And for instance, all the projects that we talked about, the IMEC, the I2U2, the current landscape, it all sounds like a pipe dream, or certainly something which we have to, put away until the return of peace and stability. You cannot have major infrastructure projects getting off the ground in a situation like this. So all that does get impacted as much as it does for the lot of the world. But for us, because of these stakes that you mentioned, I think it's particularly important.
You've been ambassador in 3 of these capitals, and you've been retired as a secretary from here. I mean, you were one of the key officials. If you're in South Block today, how would you respond to the situation that is at hand right now?
I think there are wiser heads in South Block who are responding to the situation. Every situation is different, and you cannot sit outside. They are the people who really know what's happening. So I don't want to second guess people who are there. But I think in broad terms, India has to take care of its particular interests, and we have to contribute in any which way we can towards a restoration of peace and security. I'm afraid much of it is now beyond any one country's doing. No country can sort of sit here and say, okay, both of you sit down and we'll bang your heads together. Not even the United States is in a position to do it. So we have to look at our particular interests. We have to keep our channels open with everybody there. And we have to, be constantly, frankly, we have to be constantly on the move to be able to engage the leadership, to be one step ahead of what possibly, as we called it, the day after is going to look like, and to see that whatever is of major interest to us as well as to our partners remains in place.
So, you talked about the US sort of also doesn't have the kind of influence or leverage right now, as we saw, and this Rafah offensive is a clear example of that as well. We saw protests in US universities, which you mentioned. US is going through a presidential election campaign right now, where the US president as well as former president who is the candidate, Donald Trump, they're both facing off, and this seems to be one of the sections where in the Democratic Party is possibly going to damage President Biden's chances because of the war. At least the young Democratic voters, that's what the polls suggest, are quite upset with President Biden's handling of the war in the last 7-8 months. I want to pick your brains on how do you see the US politics sort of shaping the war in the next 5 or 6 months before the elections? And then if there is a change of administration, then what happens to this war?
Well, I think, anything that happens in Israel, anything that happens particularly in Israel, in the Middle East, impacts deeply on what happens in the United States and vice versa. They are really linked at the hip. And I think what has happened is that President Biden, who is a great supporter of Israel, came out with a full support after October 7th. He actually visited Israel. He gave Bibi a bear hug. And one of his intentions, of course, was to try to slow down the ground invasion. But in the same time, he expressed full support for Israel, and has continued to support it materially in terms of arms and ammunition, in terms of the military subsidies, etc. And that, as the civilian toll has risen in Gaza, that has begun to become a debatable approach in the United States. And people have, besides the campus protests, I think there's a lot of belief that Biden should have called Bibi to order much earlier. Whether he can or not is a question, because Netanyahu has, scoffed at United States trying to control what Israel wants to do. So that has actually begun to play into the electoral calculus in the United States. Because ultimately, the election between Trump and Biden is going to be decided by a very few votes within a few swing states. And for instance, the Arab Americans in Michigan are certainly, upset. The young Democrats are upset. And now when he's trying to do a correction of taking a tough stand against Netanyahu, saying, no, you can go in, but here are some more weapons, but still don't kill civilians. That again is dividing the electorate, because the pro-Israelis, Democrats, for instance, are beginning to question that, why are you getting second thoughts about supporting Israel? So all this is happening. And at the moment, I mean, he's tried to do a correction because of his election. How much of that will actually impact, how much of loss there will be, remains to be seen. And if there is a change, and if Donald Trump is back in the White House, you can expect absolutely anything. It's going to be a great mix of chaos, transactionalism, opportunism, He was very close to Bibi Netanyahu.
Mm.
But then he was unhappy with him because Netanyahu congratulated Biden on the election when Trump said the election was being stolen from.
Right.
He's also been critical of Biden
Mm.
for letting Bibi, carry on. He's been wanting to support. He has supported Israel, and yet he is saying, "Okay, hurry up, finish the war. You're killing too many people."
Mm.
So we don't know where he stands,
Mm.
and I don't think he knows where he stands because he hasn't really come out on critical issues like hostages, ceasefire, the day after in Gaza. We have not seen. What we have seen are some completely bizarre statements. For instance, by Jared Kushner,
Mm.
believes that Gaza could be a wonderful and valuable waterfront property.
Mm.
And the people could all be sent to the Negev desert. Frankly, he was very good in terms of his support for Israel when Trump was there. Biden did not change any of those policies, like moving the embassy and recognizing Golan, etc. And he was the one who started this whole normalization thing. And thinking that, we'll make this an economic paradise, we'll create a lot of nice properties in Gaza, and, all will be well. So how he actually reacts if he comes to White House, what stage the war will be by then, will depend on a lot of things. But I don't think it will be a very coordinated, a very statesman-like policy that you will see if there is a change in administration. So not much to choose.
Before I move on to the audience questions, I know we have lots of questions from the audience. I wanted to, ask you about the two-state solution, especially because, we just had 3 European states, Spain, Norway, and Ireland. They kind of recognized Palestine as a state. India had obviously, as always, recognized Palestine as a state, spoken in favor of two-state solution. But given the situation, many would say that the two-state solution is as good as dead. And where do you see the future prospect of the two-state solution?
Well, to use your metaphor, Shubhajit, I think this two-state solution has been dead for a very long time. It was almost buried, and now it has been exhumed. Unfortunately, because whether you go back to the Peel Commission of 1937 or the UN Partition Plan or the UN Resolution 181 and or the Oslo process, this seems to have been the only solution. And unfortunately, the promise of Oslo never caught on. And through the years, we have countries, United Nations, resolutions have paid lip service to the two-state solution, but nothing has happened on the ground. In fact, things have happened which have made the two-state solution impossible. So whether it's a weak Palestinian Authority, whether it's a so-called corrupt Palestinian Authority, whether it is a division between Hamas and Fatah, whether it is intense settler activity in the West Bank, which actually is taking away the land, taking away from the concept of land for peace, is, all this put together and the move towards the right of Israel politics over the last 10, 15 years, the distinct move, the sidelining of the Israeli left, all that put together means that the two-state solution was not happening. There was no movement to it. Now, what has happened after this conflict is that it's become a rhetorical fish again. Everybody is now talking of the two-state solution again. The United States, China, India, of course, and a lot of majority of countries. Yes, let's have a two-state solution. Now it's become a condition again for the normalization, at least a pathway to a two-state solution or a two-state solution. We should be added on to the normalization of process. So it's come back into our lexicon. Now on the ground, nothing has changed. In fact, it has become more difficult because at the moment, the Israelis are not in any mood to have a Palestinian state on their border. They say, you saw what happened on October 7th. And the Palestinians, honestly, are not convinced of anybody who can deliver this two-state solution to them. Because they feel as vulnerable about Israel being on the neighborhood as the Israelis feel about Palestine. So I think it's a good thing to keep as a long-term aspiration, but I would not hold my breath that this is going to happen very quickly.
Thank you so much. I'll just move to the audience questions now, and the first question is from Dipanshi Kanodia.
Okay, so my question is that what are the immediate and long-term implications of the death of the Iranian president, both domestically and internationally?
Could you repeat it?
The Iranian president's death. What are the immediate and long-term implication? If I heard that.
As I said, I think Iran has sort of, taken the unfortunate demise in its strategic step, and I think they will very quickly have a new president. So I don't think that the passing of a particular leader will have major strategic implications, either short-term, long-term, for the region or for India.
Right. This next questioner is Karen Gabriel from St. Stephen's College. If you could unmute yourself. Yeah, and please ask the question.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes,
please. Please go ahead and ask the question.
If you could hear me, I just want to ask my question quickly.
Yes, please.
But I've been listening quite carefully, and it sometimes occurred to me that perhaps there was not enough recognition of what is happening in Palestine at the moment, or the long history of suffering that has characterized the lives of people in Palestine. And it leaves me with really a very troubling ethical question today.
Have we lost? Well, yeah, I see, Ms. Gabriel. If you could go ahead with your question, we lost you in between.
Let's take the next question.
Yeah. The next question is.
if she comes back, we would like to take that.
Absolutely.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. The next question is Swastik Madake.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes. Please.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, Ambassador, sir. Good evening, Shubhojit. Very insightful talk. Thank you. My question actually pertains to something that the ambassador actually has talked about, but briefly, it's about the infrastructure interest that India has between India and Iran. So, with the coming up of IMEC and initiatives like I2U2, it was seen that India is growing closer with Israel. And now, in the between of these, what we call as West Asian crisis, I think we have re-engagement with Iran on Chabahar agreement. So, what do we need to conclude from this as to how India is trying to be a stakeholder in West Asia? And is this the most effective way, or how they're going to calibrate? Because Ambassador Sir said that stability is the imperative to go in for any kind of connectivity projects. But right at this moment, we have re-engaged again Iran, and that too when we have US already in the business. So how do we see this Iran re-engagement in the light of all the events that have been happening in Palestine and Gaza?
Well, I think, our general approach has been that it's not an either or situation. We have under our policies of taking an independent stand on strategic autonomy, and doing what we need to do, and that's left to diplomacy to balance our interests. I think the re-engagement, as you call it, with Iran is timely. And it has, we've had our foot on Chabahar. We have to move forward on it. It's critical for our engagement in the region, for our access to Afghanistan, for access to Central Asia, and also for demonstrating our strategic autonomy. We just can't saying that we have a good relationship if we don't have something on the ground. So I think that's been a very useful, a very timely a step, and we have to proceed as much as we can. Of course, it's not easy because there are U.S. sanctions on Iran, and we have to play under that cloud. At the same time, I don't think we can't have everything moving at the same time. If the landscape changes due to a conflict, you can't still go into an infrastructure project. So I think we have to take each issue on its own merits.
Right. Can we get Ms. Karen Gabriel back?
Anyway.
So I would move to the next questioner, Pratima Agnihotri. Pratima Agnihotri. I would then move to the next question, Jaishil Shah.
Good evening, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Please, go ahead.
Sir, as we have seen recently, the countries like Norway, Spain, Ireland have given the official recognition to Palestine. So will this step have any impact on the relations within the NATO countries, as USA have been supporting to Israel in the war? And will this make way more tough for Israel to exist with the tag of a Zionist nation?
I don't think I got you fully, but I think I got the sense of the question. I think essentially this is diplomatic pressure. This is diplomatic pressure which is being put by certain European states by recognizing the state of Palestine, and this is the way how world opinion is made. It make no real difference on the situation in an immediate sense, but it is a way of adding to support for a separate Palestinian state.
Mm-hmm. Right. The next question is from Yatharth Berman. Yatharth Berman.
Good evening, Mr. Sarna, and good evening, Mr. Roy. So my question is, amid the heightened tensions of the Israel-Hamas conflict, how can India leverage its diplomatic influence to mediate and promote dialogue between conflicting parties, with simultaneously advancing its strategic interest, ensuring energy security, and fostering cooperative economic and political relationships in West Asia?
Well, I think India can't do everything at the same time, and this is a situation which the immediate stakeholders have to resolve. This is beyond mediation by a third country, particularly a country which is not an immediate stakeholder. If countries like the United States, who have so much leverage over both parties, are unable to do much, then we can only sit and advise and take part in broader discussions. At the same time, we have to keep an eye on the ball of our own national interests to make sure that our people remain safe, to make sure that our projects remain safe, if we can, to make sure that our access to energy, our trade routes, our sea routes remain safe. We don't have to be out on every barricade at the same time.
Right. So we have Karen Gabriel has submitted questions, which I think she was unable to ask. So the two questions are: why are no concrete steps being taken to rein Israel in? Please comment on the economic and military reasons for this tacit complicity. And second question is: what does the documented displacement and massacre of the Palestinian people mean for marginal people everywhere?
Well, as far as the first question is concerned, I think the countries who have to take a decision are the countries which are supplying the bulk of military and economic assistance to Israel, and that essentially is the United States. And I think that is the subject of the entire debate within the United States. Now, the fact is, the historical reality is that the United States, President Biden in particular himself, is bound to support Israel. And therefore, they are continuing to do so. When things get too hot, for instance, a few weeks ago, they put a pause on certain kinds of ammunition to be sent. But at the same time, they gave a $1 billion package for other stuff. So I'm afraid that is the harsh political reality. And there has been a greater call for people to react. However, the Arab states themselves, who got immediate stakeholders like Egypt, Jordan, etc., also don't want a war to come into their land. The Turks have made a call for everybody to come together, even today. So I think what we don't want is a larger war. I think what the world doesn't want is a larger war. What the world wants is diplomatic pressure to bring this to a close as soon as possible. And yes, on your second question, I think it's a very, very sad thing that has happened in terms of the impact on the civilians, on the displacement of almost 2 million people, the constant displacement, the loss of civilian life, the apartheid situation which has prevailed in the occupied territories for years. And all that, I think, is a very sad commentary that this can happen in the 21st century.
Right. The next question is Gurpratik Singh. Gurpratik Singh, if you could unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hello, sir. I am audible.
Yeah, you are. Please.
Good evening, sir. So I would like to ask two questions. So my first question is Hamas really fighting for the well-being of the people of Palestine? I mean, it's looking like they are just using them as a shield against the Israeli army. And so my second question to you is, the Hamas is getting funding only not from the Iran. As in the past, the many Middle Eastern countries have come together to attack Israel. So, sir, it is possible that they all are funding the Hamas to just making a chaos in the Israel. Thank you, sir.
Well, I think on your first question, yes, the way the territory is in Gaza, the way the population density is in Gaza, there are, to some extent, civilian cover on Hamas militants. And that is something which Israel says that, civilians are dying because Hamas is hiding amongst them. The issue is how many civilians must die for how many Hamas militants. That is the whole test of proportionality. At the same time, so I think Hamas has certainly, taken up the flag of Palestinian resistance. at the same time. And this can be seen in the fact that their popularity is actually rising, even in the West Bank, where Fatah was more popular. Whether the other Arab states are also funding Hamas, I'm not so sure, because I think, and I honestly don't have any facts or to tell you one way or the other. But I think Hamas is not an extremely popular unit. It's part of the branch of the old Muslim Brotherhood. And I don't think any of the other Arab countries want Hamas to be present. Of course, there are some countries, like some of the leaders stay in Qatar and in Turkey. And they certainly are supporting it in one form or the other.
Right. The next question is Piyush Nandan from JNU. Piyush Nandan.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
So my question is not just around Israel-Palestine conflict, but conflicts around the world, and the role of United Nations and other international agencies and their inefficiency to de-escalate the situations. So in this case, when a lot of money flows into keeping these international organizations afloat, and of course the proven inefficiency, what could be the way forward? How this issue can be resolved, because UN and other parties do not have a way to enforce their decisions and resolve the conflicts.
Yes, you're
so
right.
Before Ambassador Sarna, you answered the question. I think I'll just pick a couple of them related in the chat box about the role of UN and ICC. Like Seema Siddiqui asks, on the way the influence of global organization has been undermined in the recent past, including UN, ICC, and the ICJ. Is there hope that they could be reinstated in terms of influence anytime soon? Similarly, there is another question from Gary Willingage. He asks that your view and thoughts on the future of the UN arising out of the Israel-Palestine crisis. So there are a number of such questions I saw on the chat box, so I just thought I'd flag this point.
Yeah, I think very briefly. Of course, we know the political realities of the United Nations. We know how the UN Security Council works, and we know that a major factor there is the veto, which the US has applied more than once in the current situation. So yes, you're not going to get an immediate political response on Israel from the United Nations, unless the United States were to drastically change its view, which at the moment does not seem likely. This should come as no surprise, because that's what the UN is. The UN is made up of member states, and when one member state is so deeply invested towards one particular country, as the United States is towards Israel, I don't think you can expect any surprises. At the same time, there are factors that the United Nations can't be just written off. The United Nations is doing other work also. For instance, the humanitarian aid. For instance, the development aid that might happen. For instance, on the so-called day after, will you have a UN peacekeeping force in Gaza? Will you have a UN-backed solution? So I think the UN is not a perfect body, but it is at the moment the only body that you have in which all countries are sitting together. And if nothing else, the UNGA resolutions define world opinion. They define a particular diplomatic approach that a country may choose to ignore because it's only a GA resolution. But at the same time, it cannot ignore. It goes into the record. It builds up a particular solution, like all the UN resolutions on Israel have over the last 70 odd years. As far as the ICC is concerned, it was mentioned in a couple of these questions. It is a different situation, because the ICC is not accepted by many countries. For instance, there are countries like the United States, Russia, China, India, not signatories to the ICC. So therefore, ICC has a weaker sort of appeal, a weaker hold on the international community. But again, if it is, it matters a lot. And that is why you have seen the strong reaction from Israel against the ICC, even the strong reaction from the United States against the ICC's call for warrants. So let's see where that goes. So I think none of these things are perfect, but this is not a perfect world, and that's we work with what we have.
Right. The next question is from Srinivasan Sundararajan. Srinivasan Sundararajan, if you could unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, sir. Can we go to the next question, please?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So the next question is from Narayan Kumar.
Good evening, Ambassador. Good evening, Shubhajit.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
My original question has already been answered by the Ambassador. It was, will Iran-Israel tensions reduce with the death of Raisi and the Iranian foreign minister, or will it increase after election of a new president? Now, I just wanted an add-on. The contenders who have been filtered out, or the top contenders or the front runners for the post of the president, appears to be Mukhber, the acting president, Mohammad Bagar Ghalibaf, who is the speaker, who's been elected as speaker, I think, just a couple of days back, and Saeed Jalili, who represents the Ayatollah on the Supreme National Security Council. Now, given the kind of contenders that we have, would it be fair to say that the tensions would likely go up after the election of after 50 days of the election of the president, of the new president? Thank you, Ambassador.
No, I don't think that the personality of the president of Iran is going to be the only or a significant factor in the rising of tensions with Israel. As I said, the Iranians are a country which is actually ruled by a supreme leader, and he has very clear and hard views. What actually happens between Israel and Iran will depend upon how the situation evolves, and how quickly Gaza comes, simmers down, and what are the implications of what happens in the rest of the country. And I think the Iranians will. So I wouldn't place, as I've been saying, too much significance on the particular personality of the president who is going to be elected.
Before we end this conversation, I have a couple of questions for you, Ambassador Sarna. You've been High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and UK is going to hold its elections on July 4th. I wanted to get a sense from you, will this war have an impact in the kind of campaign and the political discourse in the elections and its outcome?
Well, I think in the UK, this would be one factor, though I think there are a large number of domestic factors, particularly in the UK, which have made the Conservatives pretty unpopular. So, I think those are issues which will be to the fore. The current Prime Minister has wholeheartedly supported the United States on Israel, and has taken a very clear view. But there, so if Labour comes, there will be a change of nuance, a shift in policy. But I think critical factors are extreme unpopularity post-COVID, post-Brexit. The institutions are crumbling. There are difficulties of running everyday life, inflation, etc. Those are going to be very significant factors in the UK elections.
Right. And the last question is on role of China in the region. And this kind of crisis, when it has happened, you think because China's sort of influence and engagement in the region has really increased. We have seen it sort of talking to Iran. It has developed rings with the UAE, Saudi Arabia. So how do you see China's role and China's sort of footprint in this region in the current crisis?
Well, even before the current crisis, and more so, because China has been steadily building up its relationships, making them more visible in this region. It's been watching the region for a long time, but they were very sort of quiet about how they went about it. But particularly countries like UAE, like Iran, they have made full use of the fact that American sanctions have cut off Iran from Europe and the US. And therefore, they have moved in terms of a huge amounts of investments. I think the figure was $400 billion over 25 years, and $500 billion, and various other projects in this area. The Russia-China linkage is also something which Iran is taking advantage of. And I think that has come in. They've been they've been a major factor in bringing about the setting up of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that so they are a player very much in West Asia, and they were even very increasingly active with the investments in Israel in recent years. So I think China is somebody who's going to be there. It's going to be a reality, very much, and that is why the US, while trying to leave the Middle East, can't really leave the Middle East. It's got its interests entrenched there, yet there is a desire to disengage, yet there is a desire not to let China be the one who fills the vacuum. And therefore, you see all these things of trying to build up proxies, trying to get a Israel-Saudi Arabia nexus going, so that the US can then begin to look at other things while having anchors, strong anchors for its policies to counter China. So yes, China is going to be a major factor.
Should India learn something from China, or you think we have our own playbook?
No, I suppose we have our own playbook. We can't really copy China. We just don't have that sort of economic heft so far that we can go and fund things in that manner. And we have our own stakes. We have our own particularities. We have our own traditional relationships. So I think we cannot ignore China, but we can do what we can. For instance, the I2U2 was something which we started. It's in its infant stages at the moment, and we don't know where it will go, depending on how this landscape unfolds. And we have our own relationships and our own concerns.
Thank you, Ambassador Sarna, for this very, very insightful, very enriching discussion. I'm sure the audience that joined us today, both on Zoom as well as on YouTube, would have benefited from your extremely valuable insights in the last 1.5 hours. I would like to thank our associate sponsor, Plutus IS, and thank you all for joining. And those of you who missed out on this brilliant masterclass by Ambassador Sarna, you could tell your friends or rewatch them on YouTube. They'll shortly be available online. And till the next edition of Indian Express Explained Live, goodbye and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.